things that I want to point out is how to make your eyes a normal color. So remember, when you click between our objects, it changes what is highlighted and what is in shadow. So one of the things, if you want to see what it looks like all together when it's going to be finished, if you go up to Scene here and click on Darken Unselected and uncheck that, you can see what the overall sculpt is going to look like. Now, for what I'm doing today, I'm going to go ahead and leave this checked, so that way it helps me concentrate on what part of the object I'm working on. But I just wanted you to be aware that this was available. Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at the paint tool. So this is again under the sculpting and painting area here. If you scroll down, you can see the word paint. Okay, so there are some different settings in here. So I'm going to go back to a fresh sculpt to kind of test these out and show you what they mean. So the first one that I want to look at here, I'm going to pick a different color so you can see this maybe a little bit better. Okay, so one of the things to notice when I'm looking through my color options here, there is like a rainbow of color on the side there. If I click and drag, it'll show me lots of different colors. When I find the one that I want, I can kind of click on it, and then within this left side here, we can see from white to black with colors in between. Those are the tints and shades. So if I click up high, it's going to be more of a pure color. If I click down low, it's going to be more of a shade. If I click more to the other side, it'd be more of a tint. I've picked my color here that I'm going to work with. It'll highlight it on the form to show me what it would look like, but it won't actually apply it unless I click right here. So if I click paint all, it's going to paint everything that color. Okay. Now, if I don't want to do that, if I accidentally click it, Control Z undoes that step. Now, the next thing I want to look at here in my paint tools is what the radius does. Okay. So radius, if you have a small area that you are trying to paint, you'll want to have a small radius. Okay. So notice my brush size is a little bit smaller. Now, here's another thing to notice. I have symmetry checked. So it is whatever I do on one side, it's doing on the other. If I don't want that to happen, I can unclick symmetry over here on the right side, and notice now I can paint without it painting on both sides. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and clear some of this out. Now, it's up to you when you test this. I would test this on a blank one and just kind of get a feel for paint before you jump in on your sculpture. So now that I've tested out the radius, the other thing I want to show you is intensity. So over here, my intensity is actually pretty high. What intensity stands for is how much paint comes out. Okay, so that's another way to think about the intensity. So if I have my intensity really high, notice how dark my color is. If I turn my intensity down and have it much lower, so now it's at 5, notice how it's very light. So you could almost use the intensity as how transparent a color would be. So if I wanted to come back over with a different color, maybe I want to use like a purple color over the top, but I wanted to keep it really light. Notice how you can see through my color. So I can do this transparency effect with the intensity setting. So the next one I want to look at is hardness. So if I increase my intensity, increase my hardness to 100%, look what happens. So you can see it's very flat color, very strong color, but you'll also notice it has a pretty rough edge to it. That's part of just the Sculpt program. So if you don't like the look of that hard edge, of those like pixelated edges, I would suggest turning the hardness down. So as you turn down the hardness, notice how it gets a little bit softer on the edges. So that's what that brush does. The edges of the brush are either fuzzy or very sharp. So if you have it at a low number, that means the edges of your brush are very fuzzy. This can help make your color look a little bit more smooth. Okay, if I have my hardness all the way up, it has a very hard edge, but it also makes the edge rougher. And no, if you test out the smooth tool, smooth does not change the way the paint goes on. So you have to control your settings under paint. So you have to work with your settings here. If you don't like the way this looks, switch your hardness so that it's a bit softer. Okay, so those are some of the settings that you're going to want to watch as you're going. If you want to give it a texture as you're painting, remember there are some different textures here. So you can use kind of a square texture, okay, or you could do like a skin texture. So if we do this, you can see it gives it kind of more of a rough paint. Almost like a speckled paint to help make it feel a little bit more like a skin texture. All right, so these are some of the things to keep in mind as you start to paint. Now, when you go into your sculpture to do your painting, there are some other things to keep in mind as well. Remember, you can do the mask tool to help you control your painting. So for example, if I was painting and I wanted to keep an area a different color, so I might do this back here. Okay, on the back of the head here. So if I wanted to make sure that I wasn't like painting these raised shapes, I could go into masking and I could use the masking tool here to kind of go along the edges of these. Now notice I lost part of it, so I'd have to be careful, but that's still raised, so I'm okay with that. Okay, so then now let's go back into paint and I could pick a color. So now when I go to paint in these areas, notice what's happening. I'm not getting onto the areas that I have masked. Okay, so this is one way I can control where my colors are going. Now, if I mess up there, I got kind of up in the edge there, I can click the undo. And then when I'm done with that, I could even kind of reverse it. So if I go back into masking now and do clear, so now you can kind of see where that's at. So I just painted this. Let's mask the area that I just painted. Now if I go back to paint, I want you to see what happens when I select paint all. Okay, so it just painted it all. Now let's go back to masking and do clear mask. So you can see where I did my painting earlier, it's still painted. Okay, so that could be one way to do some of your masking, use masking. Masking is also great for different features. Now I'm not gonna go that way. I might just go ahead and paint it in. So I could take, because that way I have a little bit more control. Now, if you want to change colors, you could also kind of create a grading effect. So I could pick a slightly darker green. Okay, and again, one thing I would maybe do is turn this down, turn the hardness down, and kind of go along that edge. Whoops, turn the intensity down too. So if I have these pretty low, maybe not quite that low, but I can kind of soften that edge so it has kind of a slower change between different areas. So I could kind of create that ombre effect. Or I could even come in with some other colors along here. So work with some different colors, layer some different colors. I could pick a completely different color and do some highlights. So remember, you can come back in and do some additional detailing over the top to help areas stand out. So, and the cool thing is, as you're going, you can also layer colors. So you can see here, I wanted a slightly different green on that side. So I could go back in and do a little bit of layering with it. You could also create kind of like a pattern. Create some visual texture. And again, don't forget, you can also use the textures through here, like the skin texture, or if I wanted to really make it bigger. Notice how it creates kind of this texture over the top that adds some interest. Remember, you can also use like the square and see what happens as you add. Something to keep in mind when you're painting. So a lot of times the light will hit like the top of an edge. So that's something you can really work with, is anywhere that you have like a ridge or something that stands out, you might highlight those features with like a lighter color. And again, remember, if you turn your intensity down, it makes it kind of transparent. So it can create kind of that sense of a highlight on there and help the feature stand out. So as you are adding your colors, make sure you're kind of layering your colors. That will help to add some interest to your design, and you might stick within the same color family. So you can see here, I'm sticking with all different kinds of greens. That allows me to do some mixing, and then maybe I really want an accent. So I could come in here and find something that's completely different, and then I could really have this horn stand out. So play with the colors and see what looks good together, what works well together, and then maybe I would come through and add a little bit of pink along this edge. I don't know. So continue to work with it, see what you think. Think about what parts of your sculpt you want to stand out. Okay, and continue to just try it, test it out. I would definitely make sure to have this saved before I start painting, because if I get going with painting and decide I don't like it, then I can just reopen my sculpt again and try again. If you have questions, let me know.